now. I am truly sorry.
In his usual calm demeanour, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta on Friday faced the Ad hoc Committee of Parliament, where he answered questions pertaining to the censure motion he faces from the minority side of the House, who have tabled some concerns for him to respond to. And on Friday, he came with his lawyers before the committee to answer the questions. Some people felt, well, he has apologized and he stated an intention to make things better for Ghanaians. Others feel differently and believe that he did not answer the questions as well as they did anticipate. What are your thoughts? We want to invite you to this conversation. Follow our handles GTV Ghana and also send your comments to our WhatsApp number 05555610034. At the table this morning, I've been joined by Palgrave Boakye-Danquah, who is a government spokesperson on governance and security. Palgrave, morning. Welcome back.
Good morning, Thelma.
Thank you for making the time. We'll be joined on Zoom by Professor Baffour Agyemang Duah, who is a former UN senior governance advisor and also private legal practitioner. Justice Abdulai perhaps might be joining us as well. But I'll start with you, Palgrave. We listened to the finance minister on Friday, and straight away he came in issuing that apology, saying that we should expect forthrightness from the testimony that he will be giving before the committee. I'm sure you would say that he did what he said he would. Do you think he was?
Thelma, very good morning to you and before the Ad hoc Committee to respond to the allegations that were paraded against him, give the Ghanaian people a better perspective of what a finance minister's roles and responsibilities are, some of the challenges that finance ministers go through and how they need to be able to step in the gap to ensure that we all continually have the good life that we all desire to have as Ghanaian people. To be fair, on Friday I was there in Parliament and I sat through the proceedings. All 5 responses in terms of allegations that were brought against the finance minister. He sought to bring clarification to that as it relates to the withdrawal of some funds for the cathedral, spoke about the contingency vote and that it was in the contingency fund, brought clarity to it as it relates to recklessness, brought clarity to those recklessness, also confidently stated that in the midst of all the challenges and even with our debt record, also gave a strategy of how our debt record has grown from John Agyekum Kufuor's time of about 9 billion Ghana cedis to John Dramani Mahamad's time to close to about 123 billion, and now as at 2021 November our debt record is about 450 million. Give the percentages of how 9 billion to 123 billion is about 1,300%, and from 123 billion to 450 billion is about 360%. So clearly, if you see the margins, you could see a lot of tact that the finance minister brought to bear. You clearly could see truthfulness. You clearly could see honesty. I'm very certain that the finance minister would have wished that these conversations were before the finance committee in Parliament, through a censure vote for his impeachment or his outright dismissal. And so clearly, as a government, we are very comfortable with the responses that the finance minister has given. We look forward to the next 2 days, which is today and tomorrow, as they bring their ad hoc committee to a closure. This week is a very important week because we are also going to be presenting the 2023 budget. The finance minister was very clear on misreporting that had been alleged against him, that he had misrepresented and brought data that was wrong to Parliament and even data to the IMF, and was confident in stating that if he had misreported data, there was no way we could have been able to come out of the IMF program, and so stated very confidently that all data that he's presented to Parliament and data that he's presented to the IMF is due to all the processes that have been over the years.
Let's bring in Professor Baffour here, and I'll pick your perspectives as a former UN senior governance advisor, say, on the finance minister's testimony before the ad hoc committee on Friday. Palgrave here believes that he was truthful and honest and he delivered on what government expected he would on the day. What are your thoughts on his contributions to the discussion on his censure?
Well, thank you and good morning to you and my good friend that you have in the studio. Frankly, if the main objective of the committee, the parliamentarians, was to nail down the finance minister, Ofori-Atta, and as a result getting dismissed, then I think they failed woefully, because it provided an excellent opportunity for the finance minister to present himself and explain the circumstances surrounding, I guess, all the accusations that were labeled at him. You see, this whole process of censure, in my view, is really not a judicial or quasi-judicial process, as we saw last week. It's a political process. If you look at other jurisdictions, for instance, in the United States, when the Congress wanted to impeach Donald Trump twice during his 4-year rule, they went ahead and did their own discussions and voted. There was no opportunity for Trump to come and defend himself. And the same happens in the British system, where a vote of no confidence can lead to your resignation. But in our system, even though there's a clause in the Constitution allowing for this process that we saw over the weekend, the same Constitution grants whoever is accused the opportunity to defend himself or herself, and that's what happened. So once you move away from the politics of this whole issue to this process of judicial or quasi-judicial process, then the whole dynamics change. Because as we saw last week, the finance minister had a right to bring in a counsel. But if this issue was debated on the floor and the vote taken, then of course there will be no need for even this kind of discussions between the client and the parliament and all. So in that respect, I think a purely political issue changed into a judicial, quasi-judicial process. And as I say, the finance minister was impressive in his rebuttals and his explanations. So Prof, that's the impression I got.
What would you say to those who did not understand what you described as a quasi-judicial process, about the fact that he had to keep referring to his counsel who were with him at the time he made his testimonies to answer some of those questions? So some people watched that and they did not quite understand what was happening, because the lawyers were not finance ministers and the minister was there to speak in his capacity as the person who has been in charge of our public purse.
If you recall, in the initial debate on the floor, they were about to do the political thing that I've been talking about. Then I think it was the Member of Parliament, Afenya Martin, who reminded the House that there is a clause that also requires that we are fair to whoever is accused, and that fairness or justice requires some kind of another process, which is to say, provide a forum for him to come and defend himself. And once you move away from the floor of Parliament, which is a political arena, to that different realm, which is sitting and doing the inquisitorial process and getting a counsel and all, then the whole idea changes, you see. So those who do not understand, simply, the finance minister had a right to counsel, had a right to explain the accusations or the charges leveled against him, and he did exactly what was expected of him.
My next question then would be, was he satisfactory in your opinion when he explained the necessity for the payments to the coffers of the National Cathedral by making the point that it was not the President's cathedral and that it was a national cathedral which they had made the payment to? Was that explanation satisfactory in your estimation?
Well, first of all, this whole notion of the National Cathedral is perhaps the most controversial issue now. Initially, of course, he's right to say that it's a national cathedral, but the president also has told the nation that he decided that if he was to win the elections, he will build a cathedral for, to honor God. In that respect, there's a conflict here. Was he doing it as his personal project to thank God for his success? Or was it something that was conceived as a national project? Well, I don't think we need to go into that. The fact is that the president wanted a cathedral built, and somehow some seed money was provided from our national resource. Now, the question is whether that seed money was approved by Parliament or not. That's why I think the conflict is.
So I got the sense listening
yes.
to the committee from the questions that were coming across the table that some were hearing about a contingency vote for maybe perhaps the very first time, or they did not know the conditions under which a contingency vote rather than a contingency fund would be the source of funds for a project like the National Cathedral. Did you get that sense as well?
I did, and I think the finance minister tried to make that distinction. I was not aware of the difference, to be honest with you. But when he made that distinction, it became clearer. But then I still had a question. Even if that distinction is made, it's still coming from a national basket of funds. And therefore, if you are using public funds, there is a way you do it. I guess you're seeking approval from Parliament, or it should be part of your budgetary outlay or whatever. So whether it's from contingency fund or contingency vote, I think it's the lawyers who pass. Whether if it's coming from the vote, you don't need further approval. So that much I'm not clear with. But certainly, he was smart in telling the country that, look, there's a difference here, and didn't come from the fund, rather came from the vote. Now, the question is for lawyers to tell us whether if something comes from the vote, it is not subject to scrutiny by Parliament. But I think in the larger context, any public funds certainly need some kind of public approval or appropriation before it's used.
So, National Cathedral funds coming from that vote or coming from the fund, the minister tried to put some clarity on that. The other thing too is the apology that he issued to the people of Ghana, and whether you think it's sincere and it's appropriate under the circumstances for him to make that personal. He did say that he felt the pain personally, professionally, and in his soul, and he offered that apology. Is it enough?
In the first place, that apology should have come long before the committee's hearing. You know, I'm not going to question the sincerity of the apology or anything. But that is good. It's good that he made that statement. But that doesn't take away the groundswell of public sentiments against his continued stay in office. You see, one issue that we are going to confront in our governance here is that now that this process has taken place, we are not sure what kind of report the committee is going to issue to the House. And looking at the dynamics of the proceedings at the committee, it's clear that there will be no unanimity between the two sides for whether they are going to submit one report or two separate reports. We do not know. Nonetheless, whatever report they submit, the public has witnessed the whole procedure. And as I said, Ken acquitted himself very, very well. So in that respect, what do? Haven't they come to the end of the road? Because that's what I keep saying. If they had maintained the political approach, which was simply mobilize support from the other side to get the 2/3 majority to vote, that would have ended it. But of course, they knew that, the NDC knew that they wouldn't get that 2/3 majority. That's why they resorted, and I think the speaker cleverly decided that, look, let a committee resolve this matter by providing the platform for the hearings. Now they've done that. If the report comes and they are unable to agree that the minister should be fired or should resign, what's the next step? I don't know what the parliament will do. I think ultimately it boils down to the minister himself. If he thinks that for moral reasons, for ethical reasons, whatever reason that he conceives.
What do you think, Prof? Do you think the minister has cause, or do you think the calls for his resignation or quitting are justified? Do you think he should quit?
Well, you see, from the governance perspectives, I tell you, if you're a public officer and there's a groundswell of sentiments against your performance, that becomes a very powerful kind of message for you to decide. In many other countries, Britain, we've seen it just recently, and other places, such a situation would have compelled the minister to voluntarily resign. So in that respect, I would say yes. But again, since we have subjected him to a judicial process, and if they don't find him guilty, then he can also justify his decision to stay on, to say, look, I didn't do anything wrong. You didn't find anything wrong with me, so I'm staying on. You see? So I think there's this kind of dilemma that we all have over this. So once the minister decides not to quit because this process you set up did not find me guilty, then we lose the moral ground to ask him to leave. So I think right now it just boils down to what the minister in his conscience, the whole conscience, will decide to do.
Prof, hold on a bit for me. Let me engage Palgrave again on the thoughts that you've shared with us. So he seemed to agree largely with some of the sentiments you made earlier about the forthrightness of the finance minister and the fact that he made a strong case for himself. The Prof also said that those who sought to perhaps find the finance minister nailing himself down to certain wrongdoings had lost an opportunity to do so when he had been so forthright with his responses. And I wonder what your thoughts are on this debate between a fund and a vote, whether it's even a vote VOTE, whether it's even a vote VAUT. Yeah. It's a bit, and for some of the people at the table, they seemed a bit taken aback, and they needed clarity on what it is. When did that come about, this idea of a contingency vote, from what we know?
So I agree with some of the points that Prof has raised. And the contingency fund and the contingency vote. Contingency fund is purely a constitutional mandate which you need to go through Parliament for approval. The minister explained that the contingency vote, and in his write-up, is VOTE. So maybe we'll just go with it. And he says that the contingency vote, on the other hand, is in line and the other government obligations, which is always approved by the Finance Committee and passed as part of the annual Appropriation Act, which is passed by Parliament. And then he gave reference to the fact that
how long have we had this contingency?
Well, he says he gave reference to the fact that this study has been going on as standard practice since 2014. Okay, so he gave reference that this has been going on since 2014, and then he gave an example that the 2014 there was no specific allocation for the 2014 budget for Ghana's participation in the FIFA World Cup in Brazil, and that the cabinet of President John Dramani Mahama in March 2014 at the time approved some $9.622 million for that tournament. And then also stated that including that amount that was flown to Brazil in a private jet for the players. Now, and then he stated that a more current example is Ghana's participation in Qatar. That at the time when the budget for 2022 was read,
there was no qualification.
Exactly. On the 16th of November 2021, Parliament, there was no specific amount that was budgeted for, and that through the contingency vote, Ghana has been able to provide legitimately funds for the team to participate in this tournament. So he gives those clarifications, and then stated that the expenditures in the National Cathedral were from the contingency vote under the other government obligations come from.
But you see, then the argument also, and perhaps not a question for the committee to answer, but a question in the minds of Ghanaians. If there are other government obligations, was the NHIS, the payment for the NHIS, back pay and all the debts that were owed them, was it an obligation on government? Was the idea of paying nurses and teachers allowances a government obligation? Why did the National Cathedral take precedence over all those other obligations of government?
No, I do not think that the National Cathedral has taken precedence over these.
These are monies that could have been put towards the payment of.
Absolutely, I do not think that the National Cathedral has taken preeminence over all these issues at all. You would recall that the Finance Minister stated that in all of his budget presentation, he had mentioned the National Cathedral in it, that as a state we're going to provide the land, we're going to provide the secretariat, we're going to provide seed money. Okay, now if we're going to make these provisions, And as part of the other government obligations, the government sought it in the wisdom of the construction of a national cathedral for the country, took some money for these purposes. I think it's been very well explained in that manner. And I'm glad that the Attorney General gave an opinion on the National Cathedral on the 6th of January 2022, that it's a state-owned company limited by guarantee under the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board. So it cannot remain the President's Cathedral.
It's not the President's Cathedral, according to the Finance Minister, and it's the National Cathedral, and it's a company limited by guarantee, and all these legal entities. Is that obligation more important than feeding children in school under the President's own flagship free senior high school policy, for example?
We have not stopped feeding children. You will recall that the Finance Minister stated that in the midst of the challenges that we are berated with, the lights are still on. Clearly stated that on page 3, that the lights are still on. People are not queuing for fuel as it is in other countries. Our classrooms are full, our hospitals are full, our dispensaries are mostly stocked. We continue to pay salaries. Roads are being fixed. I traveled this weekend to the Ashanti region. I've seen that the road all the way from Pokwasi all the way to Insawam is being fixed clearly. So in the midst of all of these, government is not blinded to the challenges that the Ghanaian people are going through. We are making sure that we are meeting the challenges that the Ghanaian people are going through on a regular basis.
So why did he apologize to us if he has done no wrong?
So he did state that globally, every finance minister, as a result of the twin issues that we have had, and we cannot underestimate the impact of COVID-19, neither can we underestimate the impact of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, this has been going on since February 24th, and here we are in November. So subtract 2 by 11, that's almost like 9 months consistent of disability that has been happening on. And he said that every finance minister in the midst of these challenges would want to feel the plight of their countrymen, and so apologizing is not outside the box at all. I mean, every finance minister around the world would apologize if the person has an opportunity to. Many of them did not have an opportunity to. Many of them were dismissed from their role. There
are some who argue that some of the price increases that we are seeing cannot be attributed to the war in Ukraine. If fish prices have tripled, fish prices that the sea is in Ghana, it's not in Ukraine, and people are having difficulty, buying the amount of fish they used to buy with the same amount of money they used to have, then that can't be blamed on Russia and Ukraine.
That can be blamed on the exchange rate. And then who controls the global exchange rate? Our city has depreciated, over and over again against the US forex. And you are aware that a lot of these things, as a result of the conversations that people have had and how they have belittled the Ghanaian currency. But we are confident that conversations that are all going, especially these conversations, especially the one that the finance minister had, is restoring confidence into the financial sector. And I'm very confident that once our city begins to appreciate people that are buying fish, and I'm a very good eater of fish, people that are buying fish, including myself, will get fish at a very affordable rate to enjoy in our various homes and restaurants.
Let's bring in again Professor Baffour Agyemang Duah, former UN Senior Governance Advisor. Prof, you've heard what Palgrave has been explaining to us. Do you think that in the minds of the ordinary Ghanaian, this process has been satisfactory, and will it give us what the reliefs that Ghanaians are looking for?
I'm sorry, the project, I didn't get it.
I'm asking if you think the process will give Ghanaians what they want, which in the end is a better standard of living, and it will contribute in any way towards ameliorating the effects of all the stuff that Palgrave has told us about Russia and Ukraine and the global financial crisis itself. Does this process help us in any way?
Well, the fact is that globally, all countries are in a big economic mess. There's no question. And I think it's a legitimate point to be made by this government, and I believe any other government in power will make the same argument. What has been a little bit troubling for most people is how overall our economy has been managed. And it's also true to say that prior to the COVID, our economy in terms of statistics and other development indicators, our economy was doing well, it was growing. But we have seen that before, okay? So my point for me is not necessarily the global impact, because under Baffour, his last 2 years, there was a major global recession it affected. And we can count that in all previous governments. The fact is that fundamentally we have a problem with our economy. Our economy is a dependent economy. We are dependent extremely on imports, not exports. So we need to change the fundamentals of the economy. Otherwise, any government that comes to power, a little wave in the global economy will affect us. So I'm looking beyond these occasional global impacts on the economy, because the economy is so weak. So I think nobody can blame the government necessarily for what has happened. But I think there are some other issues, you may call it tangential, where perhaps the NDC were looking at. Like we just discussed the use of money for the cathedral. But in the scheme of things, even if you voted 50 million, I don't know how much you voted 25 million for seed money. In the scheme of things, that in itself will not be a major issue. It's just a matter of approach. How was that approach? Did they receive the necessary approvals and all? Okay. So I think we need to begin to look forward to see how we bring our economy on a better ground. Because as it is now, any least waves in the global economy will make us fall apart. And that's what we're experiencing right now.
In the spirit of finding ways to make our economy perform better, what do you think, again, referring to this process and this procedure against the finance minister, does to our negotiations with the IMF? Does it add to the, I'm looking for a word, the credibility of the finance minister in his negotiations with that Bretton Woods institution?
Very interesting point. When the argument was made that because of the IMF negotiations, because of the preparation of the budget, the finance minister should be allowed to stay on at least for some months before he goes. That argument came to our attention after the group of NPP parliamentarians met the president. And for me, that wasn't a strong argument, because when we have a country, we are building institutions, we are not building individuals. Because as I said at some point, if, God forbid, if Ms. Ofori-Atta falls sick and you can't lead the negotiation, would that mean that our engagement with the IMF will end? No. And the IMF president has had the occasion to tell the world that they deal with institutions, countries and institutions. They don't deal with individuals. Okay? So now that Ken has somehow, at least from the process we witnessed last week, one can say he has cleared himself. Are you asking if he still has the credibility to go forward? I don't think the IMF for it. IMF is not bothered. Whoever the government of Ghana submits to them for the negotiation, they will deal with the person on the basis that the person is representing a country. So for the IMF, whether Ken is credible or not, I don't think is material in this discussion.
What would be your advice as we look forward to hearing from perhaps the finance minister on the budget statement for 2023 should be the key points for focus? Do you think that there are specific areas that should be highlighted which deserve highlight in the budget statement as we are expected to have it in the coming days?
Well, first of all, let's clear a certain obstacle first. What we know is that the NPP parliamentarians made a declaration that unless Ken is out of office, they are not going to give him reception at the parliament. As we speak, we're having so if we assume that last week's processes had cleared him and therefore they are back to accept him, we are yet to know. So that's a major thing that we are not discussing. If they have rescinded their decision and they are prepared to receive in parliament, I don't know. And the same thing goes for the NDC. So we need to resolve that. Now, to your question directly, as for what he needs to present, I think he has a tough issue on his hands because, as you know, the economy is not doing well. Inflation, how do we curtail inflation? The recent measures by the executive instructing the Bank of Ghana to disallow permissions for foreign exchange to import certain items. Those are in the right direction, but they may have come a little bit too late. So I don't know how Ken is going to balance the various pressures on the economy. You need to continue to build roads, as my good friend Palgrave mentioned earlier. You want to still continue to build the 101 hospitals? I don't know. Because certainly the government will have to cut down its expenditure, both in some of the flagship projects, because we don't have the money. And right now, we cannot go out there to borrow because we have hit the ceiling. We can't borrow anymore from the Eurobond. So the government will be compelled to cut down certain expenditures. And I want to suggest also, not only the projects, most of us have been talking about the size of government. If you look at the extent of our support for public officials, I think it's outrageous. So the government at this point should bite the bullet and reduce the size as part of the cost reducing measures that we need in order to bring some sanity in the budget that Ken Ofori-Atta hopefully will present.
Prof, thank you for making the time to explain some of these issues to us. Professor Baffour Agyemang Duah is a former UN senior governance advisor, unpacking some thoughts for Palgrave to digest for us in a few minutes. For now, I'll take your thoughts on what we've discussed so far. Valerie is at the screen, 0555561034. These are your thoughts and not the thoughts of GBC. Keep it short and temperate so we can get as many of them as possible. Okay, Val?
Right, thank you, T. Good morning, Thelma. What stops people like Professor Agyemang Duah asking or calling on the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, to resign? If it were to be an NDC minister, I bet you, Thelma, Professor Duah would have been loud and clear. This is from Alhaji Haruna in Ashaman. Leviticus powers, this is too long, and so I'll skip it. You know our rules. This is from Eric Boedi, and he says Ghanaians would miss Honorable Ken Ofori when he is no more. Please, Ghanaians, let's wise up and don't give a bad name to a hero. God bless our homeland, Ghana. This is from Eric Boedi. Richard Adade is saying, hi, Thelma. Sorry from the finance minister will do nothing. We know this government is full of con men and women. He must go. That's all. This is from Igwe from Teshi, and that's all from our screen.
Okay, Val, thank you for those messages and thank you for sending them across to us. Palgrave, the Prof made a number of comments I find worthy to put before you. Will the NPP MPs, and indeed you can't speak for the NDC side, but will they receive Ken Ofori-Atta when he comes into the chamber to deliver the budget statement?
Thelma, we are yet to see.
You don't know?
I don't know.
The party doesn't know, government doesn't know if the NPP MPs will receive Ken Ofori-Atta.
So you would recall the party released a statement for the MPs to abstain from the vote of censure at the time when...
But not about the budget.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I'm saying, that today is Monday. We have about 2 to 3 days. If the budget is to be read either on Wednesday or Thursday, because I know that we have a Ghana march on Thursday, so there's a likelihood the budget
playing Portugal on Thursday
would either be read on Wednesday or Thursday. But regardless, whatever it is, we have about 48 hours to 72 hours to make a decision. I'm confident, really, regardless who presents the budget. We've seen in our time when the Honorable Ken Ofori-Atta was not available, the majority leader presented the budget. So the budget is the president's budget for the country. I'm certain that the budget will be presented either from the finance minister or from any.
But even if the finance minister does not present it himself, it would be presented in his stead.
The budget is the president's budget. Yes, all the budgets that...
So they can print and give it to Honorable Haruna Idrisu to read.
Haruna Idrisu is not a member of the government.
Okay,
yes,
so any member of the NPP side can be given the statement to
any
present.
member of government in parliament.
Okay.
Can read, a senior member definitely can read that,
right,
as well.
What are your thoughts on the cutting down of the size of government? I've seen some rumors flying around about a reshuffle, which we are being told are not true. Perhaps they are on the cards. Should we expect that as well?
You know, we live in very interesting times, and I'm very confident that the president, as a listening president, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, has listened very well to the Ghanaian people. I'm confident that a few things will happen before the year goes to a close. Size of government, cut down on expenditure. You'll recall that when the president presented the State of the Economy, he mentioned that we had started our cut down of expenditure from April and had extended it to 2023. So I want to tell the Ghanaian people that December this year is not going to be a very good Christmas
How much
for
has that
government
saved
work
us?
as
All
well.
these measures,
The estimation of cut down of 30% of expenditure, 50% of fuel allowance, 50% of sitting allowance, cutting down and no starting of new public offices, cutting down of salaries of 30% of ministers, deputy ministers, CEOs, or government appointees is supposed to yield us close to about 30 million Ghana cedis at the end of the year. So it was for an estimated 9 months, which ends in December. The president has extended that to 2023. And so government officials are not going to have a field day in December. It's going to be a tightening of everybody's pocket, which is clearly our own contribution to the challenges that we are having in the country. We are letting the Ghanaian people that we are burden sharing in this responsibility. In the budget, I'm very certain that very stringent measures would be put in place. I think that this is going to be a very interesting budget of the Fourth Republic.
So, Palgrave, burden sharing, road tolls.
So road tolls, you recall that when the finance minister gave the media review, he stated that we're expanding the roads. After the expansion of the roads, every single road that has been done will be tolled.
More messages on our screens. Valerie in red is also still there. Val, more to share?
Yes, this person did not send his or her name, but a couple of questions. One, says the so-called vote, where does the money in it come from? Two, why would Ofori-Atta always get an answer from those legal advisors before answering a simple and straight question that has to do with his office? Three, many of Ofori-Atta's responses to the questions being asked, does it mean he is aware of any specific figures and amounts dispersed for a particular project? And four, listening to the straight questions and answers from the gentleman on either Wednesday or Thursday, which shows he knows his job and everything that happens in his office. This is from Henry. He sent his name.
Okay. Palgrave, so you are dressed in white like the finance minister was when he appeared on Friday. If he had nothing to hide, why was he referring to his lawyers to answer some of the questions? He is the finance minister.
You have to recall that the censorship, like Prof had mentioned, is come into a public arena. And definitely, if you have legal advice, nothing leaves you from falling on your legal advice in that conversation. I did not find anything wrong with the finance minister conferring with his lawyers.
So
even the two co-chairs confer with each other, and even the members of the ad hoc committees confer with each other and compare their notes.
So you don't agree with those who think that gives a perception that it's something to hide?
Not at all. The finance minister, that's what I'm saying, that this finance minister, giving the Ghanaian people a good bird's eye view of what every single finance minister goes through in making sure that things are working in the country. And I commend the finance minister for his tact, his calmness, his religiousness, his faith, his confidence, and also reminding the Ghanaian people that we're going to come out of this very strongly. And you remember Prof said it. At the time when we started in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, up until March, Ghana was recording the single-digit inflation, which had not happened since 1983. So I posit that the next 2 years, from 2023 to 2024, is going to be an extended best years for this country.
Because it was presumably under an IMF program.
We left the IMF program. We left the IMF program in April of, I think, 2018 or so, and we recorded single digits even after we left the IMF. So it's not because of the IMF program that we recorded single digit inflation. It's just as a result of the good management of this economy.
Good management. Absolutely.
Very good management.
Right. DOI is saying, Thelma, why is it difficult for a black man to resign than go through all these processes? Agree. Skip this one, that's for CAF. Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta resignation will not change anything. We need to look at food importation and the size of government. That's from Joseph Olivers Ayite. Nana from Klagon is saying, Thelma, good morning. The finance minister assured us of not going to the IMF, and for me, that's enough grounds for him to resign now that he has led the way. Resign now that he has led the way.
Palgrave, do you want to respond
I can respond to that. You know that,
right.
You see...
Because you are leading a charge you don't believe in.
Is the president Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. You'll recall that we were very confident as a government that we're going to raise internal revenue. Now, in 2021, when we read the budget, we put in the electronic levy. It stalled the entire government business for close to about 6 months. Having looked at the digital economy that had grown from 76 million from 2016 to almost 1 trillion Ghana cedis as we speak today, and having seen that it's important that we raise revenue on the digital platform, Ghana having close to about 44 million SIM cards in this country, which is more than the population of Ghana, where you have concentrated in, income in terms of people that are contributing to income tax, concentrated in Greater Accra, where people want roads in their villages, they want schools in their villages, they want lights in their villages, they want hospitals in their villages, and we want to be able to ensure that when we expand the tax bracket and put in this electronic levy of charging about 1.5%, so people can contribute and expand, so we are not overly dependent on foreign donors, and making sure that we are living the Ghana Beyond Aid dream, and that was stalled. That the Ghanaian people were very concerned.
While all that was happening, the construction of the National Cathedral had gone on. So these monies from the contingency vote could have been taken into account
whilst all of that was happening,
Agenda 111.
Whilst all of that was happening, beyond the National Cathedral, school children were in school. Whilst all of that was happening, beyond the National Cathedral, nurses were working. Whilst that was happening, beyond the National Cathedral, doctors were working.
Have the trainees allowances been paid?
I beg your pardon?
The trainees allowances, have they been paid?
Trainees allowances. There are so many trainees. I'm not too sure.
Nurses trainees allowances?
Any single team where their salaries have not been paid or their percentages have not been paid will be paid.
Palgrave, thank you for sitting with us. We'll have you back once again to join us.
To
for an understanding of government business, Palgrave Boakye-Danquah is a government spokesperson on governance and security, who are joined on Zoom by Professor Baffour Agyemang Duah, who is a former UN advisor on governance, and he's helped us understand the motion on the censure of the finance